Marlborough Middle School. Today is Wednesday, March 1st, 1989, and we are participating in a project designed by Mrs. Landers entitled Celebrating Marlborough Through the Years. Today we have many outstanding Marlborough residents with us. Two of these men, Mr. Richard Kelleher and Mr. Raymond LaValle, have volunteered to be interviewed by students Shane Kelly and Jessica Graves on videotape. Both of these men have contributed significantly to their community. We thank them for their cooperation. We also have many other residents who have given their time, knowledge, experiences, and a part of their lives so that we can learn more about Marlborough down through the years.
Mr. Raymond LaValle has been involved in politics for many years. He is a retired Deputy Secretary of State, a position which he held for 20 years. He has served for a total of 16 years in the Marlborough City Council, having been elected as its president twice, 1970 and 1988. In 1980, he made an unsuccessful bid for mayor. Councilor at Large, Mr. Raymond LaValle, we are pleased to have you with us here today.
We also welcome Mr. Richard Kelleher, who presently works in the Sales and Control Services. Mr. Kelleher was instrumental in starting a chapter of the United Way in Marlborough in 1970, and he served as its president from 1970 until 1981. He remained on the board until 1983. He presently serves on the board of directors of the Marlborough Girls Club.
Good morning, I'm Shane Kelly, and this is Jessica Grace, and we're going to interview Mr. LaValle and Mr. Kelleher. What part of Marlborough did you grow up in?
I grew up on South Street, up on White Park.
I grew up in the east end of the city, on Lincoln Street, near Middlesex Square.
What schools did you attend when you were growing up, for elementary, junior high, and high school?
I went to St. Anthony's Parochial School, which was later St. Mary's, and I went to Marlborough High School.
I attended the Immaculate Conception School on Washington Street, and also Marlborough High School.
What was popular when you were growing up?
Popular?
Yeah.
What respect? Let's see. Ted Williams was a big name in baseball. The Boston Celtics had Bob Cousy, Bill Russell. And the music, at the beginning, Elvis Presley was just coming into being when I was in high school. And in fact, that was the start of rock and roll when I was in high school. And but I listened to a lot of ballads and a lot of Frank Sinatra, and he's still around. People are on that time. But we were in rock and roll till we were just a little different, a little quieter. Baseball was different. There was no little leagues. We organized our own games, our own little leagues, and we organized our own groups to play together. We had a boys club, and it was just a little less organized. It was all there.
In my teens, of course, we didn't have a boys club. We didn't have any organized sports. We organized our own sports. I met in the area a bit earlier than Mr. Keller when Duke Ellington and Glenn Miller's bands were enriched in sports like youngsters today: baseball, football, hockey, basketball.
What type of clothes did you wear during the summer?
What type of clothes were similar to the type today? The only thing is, back in those days in my era, anyway, we were right in the throes of the Depression. I can remember I had one vest suit that I wore on Sundays, and for school we had what we call our vest, but it we came home, we had to take it off and get into our play clothes. I grew up frankly during the Depression era.
We're a little different. I more or less went to turn at that time, like everybody else. We got the, we used to call it DA haircut, and we wore dungarees, and of course we weren't allowed to wear them in school. I remember one day I went to high school and I wore my dungarees, and the principal at that time sent me home and said I wasn't allowed to wear dungarees in school. But we were, you know, Elvis was the big thing, the fads was beginning, and there was a thing, music type where the black leather jackets and the tight jeans and the peg pants and blue suede shoes and things like that were coming into. I think we all had a try at that. It was a changing society at that time. It was really beginning to change from a different era.
What kind of music did you listen to?
As I said, I listened to Glenn Miller's orchestra, Duke Ellington, that type of music. Rock had come into being when I was in the teenagers.
You mentioned earlier that you had one best suit on Sundays. Did you regularly attend church with your family?
Yes, we did. We had to attend church and the guys seated at the end conference. It was strictly a family affair.
We had to attend my parents' St. Mary's Church. That was every Sunday.
Before TV, what was done for fun?
Well, I grew up, I was like 10 or something on TV. We first got our television. So I did grow up because I had a great imagination. So I used to sit and listen to the radio back when I was 8 and 9 and listen to all the old radio shows. And, we played a lot of games in our families. We used to sit around at nighttime sometimes and play different card games and everything. But I was probably the first television group babies. We saw Milton Berle and I Love Lucy, and I was a very young teenager and such like that. They were the TV shows that were coming on at that time, and we got one, I say, when I was only about 10 years old, so it wasn't too, I didn't miss TV by much. I didn't miss too much TV.
I was long before TV came into being. It was more family-oriented. There's things that playing family games, so forth, and Saturday night, I remember my dad would go downtown and buy the Sunday newspaper. It came out late Saturday night. They wouldn't sit around and play games, making popcorn. It was more family-oriented, which I think contributed to the difference between now and then in our social life.
Could you please describe a typical school day?
Well, my typical school day was get up about 7 o'clock in the morning, have breakfast, go to school, get to the school about 8:30 so we could play in the schoolyard. We came and go from school at lunchtime. The only ones that stayed for lunch in those days were the ones that had to ride the school bus. Everybody else went home for lunch. We came back, and at 3:15 we were dismissed. Went home, immediately took off our men's school clothes, get into our own clothes, and depending on the season, we'd go out and play in the winter, go sliding and so forth.
Well, I went to a parochial school. We had two different sections. In the morning, we had all French classes. So they were run by the French sisters. And in the afternoon, we had all English classes. We studied, in the French classes, we had a lot of French history, singing, music, and stuff like that. And then in the afternoon, we went through our basic arithmetics and English and geography. High school was a little different for us. Many of the kids would probably like the way we went to high school. We went at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were out of there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We were all done. And we had 5 periods and 6 periods generally a study period. And generally at that point, we were able to get out to play sports by 1:30. We were up at the baseball field, football, whatever done. And I was very interested in golf in those days, so I still am. And I used to go down and during the summer, spring and fall, and caddy in the afternoons. So it was pretty much what we did. It was an easier day, I thought. quicker.
What activities took place on Friday
Regarding what? Regarding school?
after school?
Well, Friday was, of course, we're gonna have the next day off. Usually when we got to be, say, 13, 14, we were allowed to go to the movies. They had Princess Theater, they had the Marlborough Theater at that time, and the Modern Theater. And it would cost us 10 cents to go to the movies. We'd stop at the store if we had a nickel, we'd get a bag of candy, and I mean a good-sized bag of candy for a nickel. And that would be our Friday entertainment.
Well, I don't know if anybody saw Back to the Future. All right, well, that was me. That was the year, okay? We'd go to the sock hops, we used to go to sock hops because they didn't want to knock up the gym, so we'd have to take off our shoes and put dancing in our socks. It was at that point starting, the music was upbeating a little bit, so there was a little bit of rock and roll mixed in with some of the ballads. And sometimes we'd go to the movies, and occasionally we'd plan our own little parties together. But it was more or less that we went downtown and like everybody else, and as I said, it was either movies or maybe a dance or maybe just a bowling or whatever was at the boys' club. Any of those activities.
What was the basic amount of money that kids got for allowances?
Well, there was very little allowance in those days. You had to earn your allowance in the winter, going out shoveling paths, shoveling out driveways, and doing errands. And you had to improve your road allowance during my era, being the Depression era.
Well, we didn't have any set allowances. We got enough to go some. If we were going to go to the movies, if the movie at that time was 25 cents, we got a quarter. And maybe on the way out, my mother might have slipped me a dime or 15 cents for a box of popcorn. And my father owned an oil company, so I used to work in there, and he would then maybe give me $1 for working the whole day. But you generally had to earn your allowance. We just didn't have a set allowance.
How were kids punished at school and at home?
Well, I think the punishment in those days were a great deal different than today. I think as I say, when we broke in school at Marlborough High School, the teachers had more control over the children and more latitude as to what today might be considered afflicting severe punishment. For example, I can remember going to the IC school, doing something wrong, and going to the superior's office. I had to hold my 2 hands out. She had what they call wooden clappers. It was a device they used to attract attention. And you might get slapped 3 times on this head and 3 times on that. Then sometimes they make you stay out of school until as late as 5 o'clock. So the teachers then had more control over the pupils than they do have today.
Again, I went to a parochial school, and they were very strict. I can always remember an incident which their method of punishment was slightly different. I remember one day we were throwing snowballs in the schoolyard, and the principal at that time said, well, she says, I want to see you after school. I went out, she said, you like to throw snowballs, huh? I said, okay. She said, I want you to throw 100 snowballs. Well, we started to throw a snowball. Take off your gloves first. I'll say after about the 35th snowball, your hands are pretty sore. You didn't throw snowballs after that. And I think at home was a little different because when my father spoke, I sat up, whatever he said. He didn't really hit us very hard, punish us really. His favorite thing would be to grab about 60 or 70 of your hairs and pull it a little bit, and make you pay attention. But it was a little more corporal punishment in those days than there is today, I think.
At what age were you permitted to drive?
18.
Same with me. 18.
How much did it cost for a loaf of bread?
Well, I was a kid. I remember paying 18 cents.
I can remember paying 9 cents for Wonder Bread because my mother gave me 20 cents to get 2 loaves of Wonder Bread. It'd be 18 cents, and I'd have the other 2 pennies for candy.
What kind of cars were popular?
I think a lot of the same. Of course, there were many more car manufacturers in those days. The big manufacturers, Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler were all there, but there were, in my day, the convertible. The Chevy convertibles were very popular. The big thing on Thunderbird just came in too. In fact, the vintage cars today would be a '55 Thunderbird. But I think the kids love the convertibles because they used to love to ride with the top sound then. And again, it was like you could pile a lot of kids and then you'd ride around town like you guys, like everybody else does today, except we were a little bit more control.
I can remember 1938, I bought my first automobile. It was a 1932 Chevrolet convertible with a rubber seat. I paid $35 for it. Gas at that time, on weekends, they usually went down sales throughout the city for as much as 8 or 9 gallons of gas for $1.
How much did a can of soda cost?
10 cents.
Mine, I remember a nickel with no deposit.
Where did you shop? Excuse me. Where did you shop for food and for clothes?
Well, we shopped in of course, like supermarkets. There was no such thing as a supermarket that you know today. You went in the store, and the clerk behind the counter would say, "What can I do for you?" And you would point out 4 or 5 items you want. He would go and get it. He would take the bag and he would list the amounts and add them up. And there was no such thing as when I was young. There's self-service they have today.
They had supermarkets. When I had First National Stores, the Stop and Shop was starting. Well, First National Stores have been there. There were a lot of corner stores, though, which you did a lot of shopping out. They call it corner stores, which today would be like your Honey Farms or your 7-Eleven. And I think our clothes we used to buy mostly are things like that at regular just men's stores. There was no big, there were no Zayres, there were Jordan Marsh had begun, but we used to go to Jordan Marsh and Flint, but they were always in Boston. There were no shopping centers. They were building Shoppers World when I was in high school, so that's a little different from today.
Was there a set time for supper to be served?
Yes, there was. We were very punctual in those days for both, as we referred to it, dinner and supper. Supper was usually served at 6 o'clock. My dad would get home from work about 5:45, and once he washed up and so forth, supper would be on. Very punctual with meals, and your mother would be very much disturbed with the fact that if you came home late, many times your food would be in the back of the stove waiting for you, but you get a lecture on the fact that you were 20 or half hour late.
Yeah, we had supper together, the family as a unit. Whenever my father said it was time, well, actually it was generally about 5:30. If he got home from work at 5 o'clock and leave about half an hour later. But we all ate together. It isn't like today, and I know my own family, where the kids came in and eat when they want and take off, and we all do the same thing to a degree, but we all ate at a real specific time, the whole family.
So you didn't go out to eat much?
Very seldom. Other than as a teenager, we go out naturally and hot dog and hammer again, but it's a family unit. Very rare, only on special occasions when we go out to eat as a family, because during my era growing up, frankly, we couldn't afford it.
I think that's pretty much the same for us. We went out to eat on a special occasion. The same reason for expense. We had a big family, and I don't think we could afford at that time really to take the whole family out to dinner. When and if we went someplace special, it was a big event for us.
What did Main Street look like?
Well, Main Street, of course, in my era, Main Street, we had the trolley tracks. Going up Main Street, we called it Crosstown. Went up a mechanic, up Lincoln, go abroad down, and we had electric streetcars that would go to Lake Chauncey over Westboro. And then those would go down to South Road to pick up an electric car going to Boston. That was in my early era of TV.
I think it's a lot, there was some changes from today, but many of the stores that are on Main Street are still there. But I had some have been torn down. There was a big fire back in the 70s where the Masonic Hall is now, the old Masonic Hall and 2 or 3 stores that burnt down. But a lot of it's still there, just different names in the stores.
All right, in summing up our interview, would there be any additional comments you would like to make?
No, I would simply like to say that the teens of today, teenagers today, are no different than they were when I was a teenager some 50 years ago. I think that teenagers today have more challenges, they have more obstacles. Back when I was a teenager, it was unknown to have to experience drugs and so forth. But I think it's a great challenge, teenagers. And as I look at my own children, my 7 grandchildren who are growing up, I see a lot of things that they are doing today that I did in that day, and I think that as a whole, we're very fortunate with the teenagers we have. We hear about those that are in trouble, but we never hear enough about the good they do.
Okay, thank you for coming to our school today. We appreciate your cooperation with this project.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
Enjoyed coming here.